And I feel like for a long time, we were like, we want to have this many downloads, blah, blah, blah. And we pulled the number literally out of our butts. And now we're just much more focused on like the people that actually really love our show. Like, how can we serve them in a deeper way? How can we connect with them in a deeper way? And then your mission becomes more clear.
Welcome to another episode, another edition of the Videocraft Show presented by Video Husky. I am your host, John Santiago, and each week it is my job to interview content creators about their stories, strategies, and experiences of building an online audience, primarily through video. And this week we have the second part of a special two-part podcast. We welcome Krista Williams, the co-founder and co-host of Almost 30, a top 50 podcast, global brand and community. Now, if you missed part 1 with Krista's co-host Lindsey Simcik, definitely check that out too. We've included a link to that episode in the show notes on our website at www.videocraftshow.com. Now, after building a career in digital marketing, sales, and strategy at Fortune 100 companies, Krista scaled Almost 30 from the ground up to where it is today. Since its founding in 2016, her podcast has been listened to and downloaded more than 30 million times, while earning recognition from outlets such as iHeartRadio, Entrepreneur, Girl Boss, BuzzFeed, and more. Aside from Almost 30, Krista is the creator of It's Krista, her personal website where she offers her honest takes on health, wellness, spirituality, and style. She's also become a leading speaker at a variety of events, including POPSUGAR Playground, Create and Cultivate, and Podcast Movement. In this episode of the Videocraft Show presented by Video Husky, I continue with Krista where my conversation with Lindsey left off. I talked to Krista about a host of topics, including the importance of learning to create for the sake of creation rather than external validation, the value of building an event-based arm to your creator business, and how Almost 30 thinks about hiring and scaling their team for their creator business, and so much more. Anyways, before we jump to that, I want to remind y'all, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button if you are watching this episode on YouTube, and subscribe to our podcast too. Wherever it is that you get your podcasts, we're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you name it. Any podcast platform, you can find the Videocraft Show there. Just look it up and you can subscribe there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and toss it to my conversation with the incomparable Krista Williams. Krista Williams, thank you for joining me on this episode of the Videocraft Show presented by Video Husky. It is a pleasure to have you on.
I'm so glad. I feel like it's been such a long time coming. Now I'm thinking that we talked about your email that you sent me and I can remember it. So I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, just for context, and this is something that I mentioned in our part 1, Almost 30 episode bonanza that I guess we're doing here on the podcast. I mentioned to Lindsey that I had reached out to you to initially back in like 2018 or so. I had like a personal blog. I still have my personal blog, and had shouted you guys out as like a podcast that I really enjoy. And I sent you an email, and you were very kind in your response to me. And I was, that's one of the things where I tell people now, like, hey, reach out to people cold, because you never know. Like, you never know if you're going to get a response or not. Like, there's no harm in like trying. So, thank you so much for being grateful. I'm glad that kind of like, almost it's basically like established a connection that has led us here today. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I don't know what it is about me and Lindsey, but it's like when we have men that listen or people that like aren't our normal audience, like perceived to be normal audience, like it makes me so much happier and more excited because, we perceive our information and our content to be, it's obviously female focused because me and Lindsey are females, but
yes,
the content isn't super as female focused as you'd think. And I've always been someone that wants to have like conversation with everyone. So whenever we have like unlikely listeners, it's my favorite thing ever. Cause I'm like, oh my gosh, that just brings me joy.
Yeah. And I think like with your podcast, there are topics that you talk about that are relevant to me. I mean, I think you guys dive a lot into like mental health and self-improvement and entrepreneurship. I mean, and the self-improvement front has been something that has been, very interesting to me over the last several years. I think a lot of us, dive into that space as we try to meander and navigate our way through our 20s. And, you and I are both in our 30s now. I think we're still learning, but like, that space is very helpful to us. And it's just a different voice. I've told this to other guests that I've had on the show that like, I think the message or like the core principles of what somebody like Tony Robbins or Gary Vaynerchuk or Tim Ferriss or whoever, like all of the, all of those types of people profess is not that much different in terms of like what you are also professing. It's just from a different perspective, from like a woman's perspective, which, I am somebody that I like to take that all in, because I think it allows, that's the only way to grow really, is if you're able to be open-minded and take in different perspectives and some perspectives that you may not necessarily agree with.
Yeah. It's important too. It's like, if you want to be a man that's dating a woman and like want to be with a woman, it's important insight into like, well, how a woman thinks or what she's interested in or what she's like learning about, and to be able to listen to and respect, like women that you're listening to on a show, like says a lot about you. Cause I feel like there is something, if you're only listening to men, if you're only listening to women, like it doesn't have to be so binary, but we just want to diversify in every way that we can. So it's like from all walks of life, how can you get different perspectives? And I find that sometimes it's like the more experienced or polished a podcast is, sometimes I feel like I lose a little bit of touch with it because it feels like a little bit more scripted than I like for it to feel. And it feels like a little bit more predictable at some point. So yeah, I mean, I just couldn't be happier, that you listen and connect with it. But it is important that if we are going to say we're people that want to grow and want to learn from different voices or people, then we have to figure out ways to do it. And I think podcast is like perfect for that. I've learned a lot from different perspectives and people through podcasts, because like you can engage in conversation, but not actively talk. So it's like you're learning, but you don't have to like be scared to speak or participate yourself,
Yeah, it creates kind of this environment or this atmosphere where you really have to be on your game, like with listening. Like I think you and Lindsey do that very well in your show. I strive to do that here. I'm not perfect at it, but it's something that, that's such a useful skill to have, not just as a podcast host, but just as a person. And even if as creators too, like just being able to really sit back and listen and try to process things from what other people are saying, I think is so important. And it's more, like, I might be on my soapbox here a little bit, in terms of this idea, but I think that's something that we need more of today as far as like having conversations with people.
Yeah. Listening is, it's like, seems silly, but it's so important. And so many people think that they listen, but they don't. Like listening means the act of literally removing yourself and your stories from the situation so you can fully hear what that person is saying. And I was someone that listening for me actually, so I grew up, my mom was like pretty neglectful. We had like mental health issues at our house. It was like really challenging. And so I actually had to pick up as a kid listening to engage with my mom because I was like trying to receive love from her. And I figured out the way that I could do that would be engaging her by like listening and asking her questions. So I didn't really get anything asked to me or I wasn't really listened to, but I could engage her by listening to her and asking her specific questions. So something that was like really challenging for me as a kid has become like almost my gift where I'm really good at asking questions. I'm a really, really good listener. And I'm so grateful that I can do it on the show. But I've also found that with listening, like the more clear I am mentally, the better my mental health is, the better my physical health is, the better my relationships are, the better listener I am. Because when you have so much going on in your brain and your life and you're just stressed and overwhelmed, if someone comes to you with something, you're like, oh my God, no. As much, even if you don't think you're doing it, your energy is very much like, I'm actually very full right now. I can't handle any more information. So like you kind of put your hands up and are just like, I can't really handle anymore. So listening is something that it's like, it is a skill that's honed through better mental health and better physical health and just living a better life where you're able to just really, really see and hear that person for what it is rather than like the story you create around it that's perceiving what they're saying.
Yeah, it's even important to like that experience also is important in terms of learning how to listen to yourself too, right? Because you need to learn how to decipher the chatter that goes on in your head, the inner critic, right? So to speak, and decipher what is useful to me and what is not useful to me. And I think people who are creators like yourself, you know, there is that constant noise in your head about like, what, you know, are you good enough? Is what you're doing enough and all of these things? And when you're unable to kind of set that aside or put it aside, it can deter you or stop you from doing the things that you need to do.
So much. I mean, if we think about, I did an episode on comparison that I really, really loved.
Yes, I love that. I listened to that recently.
That one was so good. I'm like flexing for myself, but the reason why it was so good is because I needed that message for me. Like I needed to know that message myself. And in it, it just talks a lot about how like our brain over evolution has been primed to compare. Like it's normal that our brain compares. Our entire life and existence is comparison. So we walk out, we're like, that tree is tall, that tree is not. That bowl is small, that bowl is not. That's a lot of food, that's a little bit of food. Like they're being nice to me, they're not being nice to me. You know, our whole life is like these sets of comparisons. So it's normal that our brain compares. But what's different is that we have just these opportunities with social media it created this opportunity to compare in like a very, very deep way all the time. And then we have our brain chemicals being activated at the same time. So we're comparing on social media, and then our brain is sort of giving dopamine, not giving dopamine, all of these things. So it's just putting us in this cycle. And I'm someone that compares for sure. I don't compare as much as I have in the past, and I go in phases. I think we all go in and out of comparison, but the feeling is the worst. I don't know if you know, it's just gross. Like when I'm comparing, it's such a gross feeling. I just feel, I hate it. But what has helped me has really just reminding myself, like whatever is going on in their life is between them and like God or the creator or whoever they work with. It has nothing to do with me. Like that whole set of circumstances in their life was given to them for their own lessons and their own learnings. And it has absolutely nothing to do with me. My own path is my own and it's complete outside of theirs. But I definitely struggle, you know, and I do find myself, if I'm comparing myself a lot on something, it'll kind of make me rethink that thing because I'm comparing. But then also it's like, okay, why do I feel like I'm so worried about the reaction of people from this, I guess. Like, I just know when I've done projects when like almost 30 as an example, like we put it out and I didn't listen to any other podcasts that were sort of in our vein. And I still don't. I listen to like very random podcasts, but I was like, I'm not going to compare because even if I did compare it, I'd do this anyways. Like no matter what, I would do this anyways because it feels so good for me. And so it's finding those things in my life that I'll do no matter what, no matter if I'll share them with the world, if I'll promote them, if I'll put them out, like I'm doing it for the sake of me. And I think when we do something from that place, rather than like, will my stuff be as good as theirs? Will my podcast be as successful as theirs? You know, then we kind of lose track.
Yeah, no, I think that's very powerful, a powerful idea, even for, you know, again, for all creators, whether you're creating a podcast or even, you know, doing a YouTube channel or anything, TikTok these days, I think that's like the first step, right? Is being able to just do something for the sake of doing it. And then, because that's what I always hear when I talk to creators who end up like finding success, is like they never intended for it to be what it became. Like, but once it started to get momentum, then it was like, let's put pedal to the metal to this. Like, I think there's something here. But if you go into like the process of, again, let's say starting a YouTube channel and you're like, I'm gonna do this so I can get 1 million subscribers so that I can get that validation from other people, you're just going to end up, I think, making yourself go insane.
Yes,
you know, because
bottomless.
It's going to take it's bottomless. It's going to take forever. First of all, it's going to take time. Like, you know, there are success stories where people are able to grow incredibly fast. But even then, like, I've always heard, and I'm curious if this is, I'm sure this is probably a feeling that you've had where you reach a certain threshold. Maybe you set a goal for yourself, like with Almost 30, like, oh, we want to get to 1 million downloads. And then when we hit that, like, we'll be somebody. But then you get there and you're like, okay, I still feel the same.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I feel like we've had that. like, this is weird, but we were nominated for like iHeartRadio Best Podcast in Health one year, and then Best Podcast in Wellness or Spirituality the next year. And I remember we got nominated the first year. We were like so excited. We're like, this is amazing. We went to the award show, and it was like the most bizarre, like unorganized. I mean, like, no shade. It was just very unorganized and not what I thought. Like, you think of award shows and you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be glamorous and amazing and blah, blah. Like, we were sitting in the rafters. It was like it brought all of the veil off of what that is. And even with articles that we've been written up, we've been written up in a bunch of different publications. You see it on your phone, and then you're like, cool, my life changed 0%. And it has to happen a few times before you're like, yeah, that meant nothing to my life. And for people, some people might mean something to them personally to be written up in Forbes or whatever, but it's like, oh wow, my life changed 0% when I had this validation or notification or whatever. My life has changed more so when I'm having the experiences with people that I want and when I'm like actively seeking it, but it really can't change from validation from numbers or notifications or publications. It's like that stuff really doesn't matter.
Yeah. No, it really doesn't. I mean, again, it's like, I think it's similar to I think about it in terms of like career too, when you're starting out. I mean, for me, like initially, like I used to work in journalism. I worked in radio, like when I got out of college and stuff. And there was always this idea of like working my way up the career ladder. And I'm sure you probably might have felt that too initially, like when you worked in corporate and stuff, like, hey, I'm going to try and become like VP of whatever division this company is. And then once I get there, then I will have everything all figured out. And again, it's like you get to these situations where you've attained what you set out to do. And then you realize, oh crap, like I got to keep hustling. I got to keep working. Now it's like, I have to work to retain this position. And so there are some people, if they don't love the process of getting there, of that journey, I know it's so cliche of like enjoying the journey and enjoying the ride there, then it's going to be like super stressful, I think, when, you're at the top and you're feeling like super defensive about keeping that position of where you are. Yeah. This has been something I've been thinking about a lot lately. And we had a membership call the other day, and one of the girls in the call was like really upset because she's like, I feel like I just started my self-development journey, my spirituality journey, and there's so much, and I'm wanting to do all these things. I have, I'm wanting to like learn this and do this and and doing all these things, and like so stressed out about what part of the process, what type of healing she should do, what type of book she should read, what practice she should do, And I'm like, if you on the way are hating yourself in an effort to love yourself, that's not the way. If the whole time on your self-development journey, you're stressed, you feel overwhelmed, you feel like tired, you feel resistant, you feel, anxious, then that's not the way to becoming happy and becoming whole and becoming all these things. So I think it's a weird thing, because I feel like in our culture, everybody knows the story of the person that won the lottery and wasn't any happier. It's like proven time and time again, or they make it to the top and they don't find themselves any happier. Celebrities talk about it all the time, whether they're talking about it from a truthful place or not. We know that money doesn't make us happy, but yet we still think that it's going to be different for us, that if we just make it to the promotion or the next thing, that we will be happy. And I was in the corporate world for 8 years, and I remember my first job, I was in consulting. I got promoted like 3 times or something in 2 years. And I remember just like, oh, I have to do more now. I just remember thinking, I'm like, oh, there's more required of me. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh, there's more required of me. I'm supposed to be here more. And the amount that I'm making was fine, but it didn't make a difference in my life. None of the raises I ever got made that much of a difference in my life. And I just was like, wow, I just was like kind of catching on to the rhythm. I'm like, okay, this is like how it's going to go forever. And I think we just need to really be honest with ourselves if we find ourselves doing that with like our weight. Say we're like, I want to be this weight to be happy. Or a relationship, I want him or her to be this way to be happy. Or our jobs, I want to get this to be happy. It's like,
I know it's harder than it looks because I'm someone that does that too, but we have to always catch ourselves when we're doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, it's definitely not a bad thing to set goals for yourself. Like I don't discourage someone if they set that as a metric, like for, again, going back to the YouTube example, you want to go and chase 1 million subscribers. That's a good like measuring stick, but you have to have other metrics, I think, that you're measuring as well. Like, and I think for me, and I think a lot of people, and this probably might be the same for yourself, is like process metrics. Like, are we showing up every week to do this? Like, are we doing the things that are within our control? Because you can't necessarily control like whether or not, a podcast episode that you do or a video that you post goes viral. Like you can give it your best shot. You can control like how much you prepare for an episode that you want to do, but you can't necessarily control the outcome of what that is. Cause I'm sure there have been many times where you and Lindsey have recorded episodes and you're like, that was straight fire. Yes. Like this is like the best episode that we've ever done. And then it like, in terms of like popularity and downloads, it's like, nil.
Yeah, no. I remember we did one about like our relationship because Lindsey and I have been business partners for 5 years now, best friends for 6 years. Like we pretty much started the business when we became friends. Like we are very deeply, intimately connected through our friendship, through our business, through our personal lives. And we did this episode on like challenges we've had in our relationship. Like it's hard to run a business and be best friends. And so we talked about it and we're like, damn, that felt so heart-centered. That felt so open. That felt all these things. And it was like totally nothing. We were like, wow, okay. And then we've done episodes. This is what I found is that the more unattached I am to it being successful, the better it does. Like we had Zach Bush on or we had Africa Brooke on, and those episodes were about censorship. They were about fear in the immune system. And they're things I feel passionately about talking about and educating people out or understanding and having conversations about. And like, I was like, oh, these are just so bomb that I was like so unattached to if they were successful or not, because it felt right that we did what we did. And then they were some of our most successful episodes. So it's like being fierce about your intention with things, but also being flexible about how that's expressed or how it's received. Because I think for us and probably for you too, like we're talking about things that aren't super mainstream yet. And I always have to remember that when I leave LA, like when you go to Oklahoma, you're going to see like most of the world is interested in this, talks about this, lives like this, which is so beautiful. And that's why I love travel, because you understand that. But when you're in the coastal cities, like I've lived, you're kind of in this perception that everyone lives and believes and works and expresses in this way. And it's not. And I'm not saying that that's why we're ahead because we're on the coastal, but I think that our podcast is usually talking about things like kind of far in advance. Like we talked about white privilege and racial inequality like 2 years before in 2018. We like, we're talking about suicide in 2018. We're talking about near-death experiences. Like we've been talking about kind of heavy topics for a while. And so if you are on the cutting edge and you are a leader, then you need to expect whatever you're doing to not always be received in like the most explosive way ever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know you're like a big Kanye West fan. And I love Kanye too. I know he's a very polarizing figure. It's very much, I think you either love him or hate him, but he's kind of in the same vein where it's like, I think back to when he released 808s and Heartbreaks, like people were panning that. It was not like well received because it was so different. It wasn't like people did not like critics had never heard anything like it before and it just wasn't well received. But here we are more than like 14 years later, I think, since it's been released. And it's like considered one of his best albums. And it's influenced like a generation of a lot of artists who came after. I mean, you could say that I could honestly say like, the style that Drake had, I think was heavily influenced by that album. And you see like, that's where again, like people who are a little bit ahead of the curve, as you're saying, like not everyone will get it right away, but eventually like then you end up looking like a prophet or something like when it becomes mainstream. But it was just like, no, I wasn't chasing that. Like I was just very interested in this topic at the time. And now here we are today where everyone is talking about it.
I mean, talk about Kanye all day. Yeezus too. Yeezus, everyone was like, what the hell is this? Like people did not understand what was happening. And it was aggressive and like unsettling for a reason. Like Jesus was unsettling because that's what was wanting to be expressed. And even you think about like T-Pain, like everyone was like, oh my God, auto-tune sucks. Like T-Pain was like ousted from culture because of auto-tune, and every single person uses auto-tune all the time now. Yeah. And it's like just such a funny thing where it's like this happens a lot. And so much of what Kanye says, people are like, oh my gosh, that's ridiculous or absurd. And he's literally so far on the cutting edge that I bring up clips on my Instagram from him from 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, so long ago, that are completely relevant and make perfect sense to our consciousness now. It's insane. And it's just given me like pause of making sure that whenever I'm feeling like I'm coming up against like an opinion or a perspective where I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like crazy or wild, or I don't agree with that I can be a little bit more open-minded because maybe it's just like a little bit more advanced. Or not more advanced, but maybe my journey and path.
It's just early.
Yes.
Yeah, it's early. It's early. Like maybe, you know, the way somebody thinks or even the way that you're thinking, like because you're facing that resistance, it's just that you're a little bit early on the curve. But then regardless, it's like what you're talking about earlier when it comes to comparison, right? Like, you know, you try to learn and train yourself to not worry so much about like, oh, does that person hate me now for the way that I, you know, for what I think or anything like that. Like, you know, it's definitely like a work in process, you know, work in progress. I mean, to kind of learn that over time.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And you just go in and out. Some days you're feeling it. Some days you're not. Some days you don't compare. Some days you do. But I think that I found that the more I just create on social media rather than consume, and I know it's hard to say that to everybody. If everyone in the world just created, I guess it'd be a better place. But I just try and create rather than consume, because even when I find myself consuming, I'm just like, oh, what am I doing? You know, you lose track of time. You're like in this like time warp. You're like, what?
Yes. Yeah, I know. And, you know, people make jokes about that. I remember back in the day when Vine was around, somebody had made like a Vine about that, about just like, oh, I'm getting ready to go out. And then you just pop onto Vine and then you end up scrolling for like 2 hours and you're like, I'm not going out anymore. That's part of why creation is difficult, because it's so much easier to consume content. It's so easy to just sit down, turn on your TV and just watch Netflix, rather than like, I'm going to take this camera out and I'm going to go interview some people today. I have to be very intentional about like the questions that I ask them and do a little bit of research. That's hard. It's really hard, but it's crazy because there's just so much opportunity now with all of these platforms that we have, from podcasting to YouTube to now TikTok. I mean, just the ability to go, you know, to reach a large number of people is crazy. It's just not something that we've ever experienced in human history.
Yeah, which is good. And then, you know, it's good to reach that many people. Like, it's so weird. I was with my friend Jenna Zoe. She's from London and she's half Indian. And we were watching this video she showed me of the pandemic, like in India, when one of the hospitals it was just like the end of the year. And like, they just did this dance, I guess, after COVID, all these hospital workers in India. And she showed it to me. And it was just so weird because it was the most beautiful thing. And we were both like crying watching it because it was so emotional. But I'm like, wow, this is such a weird experience that I'm able to watch this video of like this Indian hospital and these Indian nurses and first responders like dancing, celebrating this thing. And I'm this like girl from the United States that, you know, would never have access to them either way. So we can find like the dark things online through the global internet, or we can find like the beautiful things too. And that's,
Yes. Yeah, no, I think that, you know, and there is a tendency, I guess, in the mainstream to focus on the negative. And I think that's just part of the human condition of us, like, you know, fear or flight response of us, just like, we're way more like conscious of like, anything bad can happen, anything bad that can happen, we want to be aware of it, because like, you know, if you die, it's game over, right? But like, that reminds me so much, like there is a YouTuber I would love to get him on the show. He is, his name is, Tayo Aina. I don't know how to say his last name, but he's a YouTuber in Nigeria, and he makes these amazing documentaries. He did this incredible video. I'll link it in the show notes since we're discussing it, but he did this little mini doc where he went to a slave trading outpost in Nigeria where colonialists from Portugal and elsewhere in Europe went and bought slaves and then exported them out of Nigeria and brought them to Europe, brought them to North America. And it's like, that is the thing that's so powerful about this media that we have now, is that, you know, that is something that we should have been learning in school. Like, we only learned about like the perspective of slavery from like, hey, once they got here to America, right? There weren't materials out there about like, here is where it all began in Nigeria. And so I think it's just so powerful when you have people like that leveraging the tools, like yourselves, like you and Lindsey, leveraging the tools available to you to bring awareness to topics that, you know, that haven't gotten the light shine on them as much as they should have.
Yeah, it's so funny how like that topic or that video I think about that a lot. What was I doing the other day? Oh, I was walking with a friend. It's just, and I'll tell that story, but it's like when you're watching that video, you're like, wow, I just put a piece of a puzzle together from my life that was missing. Like, you know, when we're in grade school, we're like, okay, we're learning about this thing, but we're not learning the whole picture. It's very diluted. It's very much from one perspective. And we know intuitively that this isn't everything. And so that's been like my obsession in life, is like to find the missing puzzle pieces of like our lives where we haven't been taught or we haven't learned certain things. And I was walking with a friend the other day, and she is pregnant. And so she was getting an ultrasound on her stomach, and her baby raised the hands. And so it looked like it was like waving. But what we learned was that actually the ultrasound is so loud on the baby in the stomach that they try and cover their ears. So it's like such a weird thing that for most people, they're like, oh my God, the baby's like raising their hands, they're saying hi, but it's actually like a response to the sound of the ultrasound. And I just found that to be fascinating, because I'm like, oh my gosh, we always have this one perspective that we perceive, but there's actually so much going on that we don't always perceive or understand. And then you figure out the truth and you're like, wow, like that's why, you know, because you have to ask with that situation too. You're like, why and how did this happen? Or like, why and how is this happening? And I love when you find out information like that. You're like, I'm never going to forget this.
Yeah. There's just so much nuance, I think, to life in general, and to you as a person, right? Yes. Like, so I think you and Lindsey have talked about this, you know, on your show about, you know, people see what you do on Instagram, they listen to the podcast, they watch you now on YouTube, and that's only a sliver of your life. You know, like, I know you just got married a couple months ago. Congratulations to you and your husband. But like that experience, you know, when I see the pictures on Instagram, I'm like, wow, looks so cinematic, looks so beautiful and whatnot. But like, that doesn't also capture probably the anxiety and the nerves that you probably felt that day, just to ensure that everything went right, you know. And so I think as we progress as people, like, this is one thing that both creators and I think the audiences of creators are starting to pick up on, is like understanding that, hey, this is just a highlight reel. Like, we need to understand that there's nuance to these people. It's still early, because I still think that we're in a phase of very much like, you know, unfortunately, like cancel culture. You say something bad here, like you're eliminated forever. And I would hope at some point that we have, you know, a path to forgiveness for people. And I know that that's not the most popular thing to say, but when you let go of that negativity, it actually makes you feel a lot better. Oh, yeah. You know, that's at least in my experience. Yeah.
I feel, you know, the highlight reel thing, it's like, I've also had to kind of recognize that if people don't want to see the highlight reel of other people, then they need to figure out the people that they want to follow that they perceive don't have a highlight reel, because it's so weird that we're like, oh, it's a highlight reel, because it is. But also people are sharing very curated problems that they have because they're getting that same satisfaction. So someone could be posting all their most beautiful photos in the world, blah, blah, blah. But someone else could be posting about how much they dislike their body or something like that. And they're essentially getting the same sort of dopamine response and hit because people are like, no, you look beautiful, or like, thank you for celebrating like a normal body, just as an example in like the body positive type movement. So we're all putting on some sort of front, whether we like it or not. Like, no matter what, you are putting on some sort of front. And I had to really realize and recognize that it's like, and that's okay. Like, you are reaching people in the world that you may not know or perceive. And for me, and the knowing of myself and people, it's like, I used to feel like I had to share the depths of my soul and like some really hard things that I had been through or was going through in real time to have connection with my audience. And now I'm much more like, I like to go through things and process them on my own and figure them out in my life and then sort of share my experience when it feels a little bit better, because there was like a leakiness in that process where I was getting validation on things that were going on in my life and people were connecting with a part of me that like wasn't healed. And I would rather have an audience or people that connect with me or community that really want me to succeed and be healed rather than stay in that trauma victim mentality. And so I always just say, it's like, if someone wants to share a highlight reel, like, great. If someone doesn't, great. It's still on us to have our reaction or response to that be what it should be. Like, we have to recognize that Instagram's going to be that way. But on the cancel culture piece, I think our episode with Africa Brooke was really amazing. We talked about cancel culture and censorship and stuff like that. And I just think that it's just such a way to silence everyone from having conversation, to cancel people. And, you know, I don't think that people really know what that does psychologically. And I find that it's very interesting that sometimes like the side of, you know, love and liberation is like the side that actually wants to cancel people for things that they perceive to not be aligned with who they are. And I'm hopeful. I think it seems like the conversation on that's really opening up and changing, where people aren't canceling people or things like that. But we have to also see too that like people get canceled and nothing happens. Like, they could lose business and things, but oftentimes people benefit from being canceled. So it just is like such a funky, sticky situation. But I feel like the conversation's changing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially over the last few years, I think is just kind of like taking the forefront on the mainstream side versus, you know, where it emerged from on social media, that it is changing. I think, you know, I tend to have hope in people. You know, I think some people might think I'm a bit naive in that front, but like, I'm sure you experience this too. One of the reasons why I feel that way is because of traveling. Like, I've gone to so many different places around the world, and I've actually seen the kindness of so many different people with so many different backgrounds and different experiences than me. That's like, I'd rather just assume good faith in people rather than like assume like this person's out to get me. And I feel like that's where it all starts, right? Is like with at least just kind of from you, because that's within your control to kind of assume that there's good intention here with this person and what they're saying. Like, it may not come out the right way, but I just feel like it's a less stressful way to live life as opposed to the opposite, where again, you're just assuming like, this person is going to let me down, you know? Yeah.
I mean, then how much are you creating that reality to happen? You know, how much are you creating the reality where you're showing yourself that people are letting you down? You know, because that's a story that you have. A story that I have is that people always let me down, or I can't trust people. And then you're sort of creating that reality. But I feel like, you know, the work of like Jordan Peterson or Carl Jung, it is really like when we deeply understand our shadow and our darkness. And that's why Jordan Peterson is like so obsessed with understanding like the high profile negative figures of our time, is because when we understand that like all humans have this side of us that like is very dark and very bad and very, you know, evil. We all have that in us. Then you really are able to like fully understand the spectrum of humans and like be like, oh my gosh, we're all humans. We all have this dark. We all have this light. Most of us, like, for the way the trajectory of how we're going in history, like things are technically getting better. Like less people are in poverty. More people have access to clean water. More people have access to food. There's less violence in the world overall. You know, from like a very specific lens, things are technically getting better, but we still perceive them to be bad because we just have this perception of like protecting ourselves through fear. So I think so many people are just addicted to that fear of things where we want to protect ourselves. But yeah, I think the travel bit, I know we were talking about that before, is like everything to me. I mean, I feel so much gratitude that I've been able to travel in my life, and it's changed who I am from such a deep level, because you just see the world and where the truth is. Like, we see such a very specific view of the world through the people we follow on Instagram, through our email lists, through our TV, through our neighborhood. And there is so much more to be seen in the world and people to love. And, you know, I'm like really obsessed with this topic, but I'm also reading Strength to Love by MLK. And in Strength to Love, he talks about like the Western man and like the white man. And he's like, why is it that the white man always perceives that, like, even though they sell their soul with their jobs and they have to work their way up the ladder, which is what we were talking about before, and they have their 9 to 5 and they're deeply unhappy. So even though everyone in the West is perceived to be and feels like we're deeply unhappy, we think that we know better than people in the world. And we think that, like, just because someone lives on an island in the middle of nowhere, that they're unhappy and that they need our help. So we have such a warped view of culture in the world. And when you travel, you see that, oh my gosh, these people are very happy. Like, you know, people in the world are very happy and very fulfilled.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you realize that people who have much less like material things than you, it's so cliche, but like you see people with like very few things and they're happy, you know, and meanwhile, like, we're here with, you know, God knows how much stuff. It's not enough to fill the void, I think, that we still all have. So I'm curious, Krista, about like your travels, you know, how do you think that those experiences on the road, impacted you to, say, become more resourceful? Because I imagine, like, being a business owner, as you and Lindsey are, with this company that you've built, you've had to be resourceful, you know? And so I'm wondering if like that experience of travel influenced or impacted that skill for you as well.
Yeah, definitely. So when I was like kind of having my awakening, I was working at my first job in consulting, and I knew I wanted something different for myself. So I quit and I ended up backpacking or kayaking in Patagonia for like a month or so. And during this time, I was with this program called Knowles, and you're not allowed to have your phone, and you have to pack everything at the beginning, and you have to basically live off of everything that you keep in your kayak. So that's your tent, that's your food, that's just every single thing is in your kayak. And during that time, it was like so different than the life I had been living. Like, I really needed that sort of disconnection and reminder of like how resourceful I could be. And I feel like that was really helpful for me, because I didn't know how to pitch a tent or like build a fire or like cook food or make food last. And that was really helpful for me. But I think as far as like the resourcefulness of travel as it relates to business, you know, we were on tour for 2 years, and you are like always on the go, and you have to think in the moment. And it's one of those things where I realized I'm like, I could react to whatever travel issue was happening, you know, say our flight got canceled or we missed a flight or whatever, but you're actually wasting so much of that energy when you could be problem solving. And so you just get into this like deep problem solving state where you're just kind of like having to figure out things as they go and having to be resource oriented or solution oriented and find resources every time you travel. You know, things come up, and it's just one of the best parts is like being so present that you can be thinking about what to do rather than like totally losing your mind and like just like losing your calm and losing your peace to find a solution. So I think travel is huge. And I think I find the best business people or the best people to work with are usually well-traveled, because they understand the nature of the challenges that come up, and they're able to really ride the wave in business.
Yeah, that's very important, I think, when you're, you know, working in business or anything in life, is just being able to ride those waves and not necessarily push against them or try to like force something that may not, you know, that may not necessarily work out. You know, you bring up something there about those events. You and Lindsey went on tour. That is something that stuck out to me. And it's something that Lindsey also and I talked about in my conversation with her about that experience. But it really stuck out to me when I first actually came across your show, because I'm like, oh, these women are onto something here in terms of like doing, like having that be an arm of revenue for themselves is creating an events-based, business arm to Almost 30. Could you walk me through or kind of tell me a little bit more about like the decision to go that route, and then even just the logistics of planning all of those things out? Because you two went all over the world prior to 2020, and I'm sure you were going to keep doing that, if 2020 hadn't happened. But that's some incredible way to like leverage this audience that you have built online.
Yeah, we had tour planned in 2020. We had 2 retreats, and then we had a festival. We were going to do a festival. So we lost a good amount of money in 2020.
Wow.
But also we were able to be home and stuff, which was really nice. And, there was a lot of other things going on in our lives and everyone's lives too that were more important. But we went on tour when we were working full-time jobs. So somehow we figured out how to make the travel work and our PTO days off and everything. And it wasn't the intention of making money at first. And I will be really honest that we made a fine amount of money, but for the amount of work and effort, I would not say that it was a big revenue generator for us. Because if you think about, if you have an event with 200 people, tickets are $30, you're making however much that is, 6,000. How much is that?
Like 6,000. 6,000 bucks.
Okay. So you have to buy your flights. You have to buy someone else's flight to support you. You have to get your hotel. You have to pay for AV. You might have to pay someone else that's participating in the event. You have to potentially buy food and rent the space. It doesn't really come out to be as much as you think. And then you're also doing work before to plan everything and promote it and all of that. So I realized that like events is amazing and I love to do them because I love to connect with our community. But for us, it wasn't that much of a revenue generator as you would think. It was really just like a marketing play where we can connect with people. And I love meeting people in person. Like we're good on the pod, but we're even better in person. So that's really like the priority. And we also got as much free stuff as we could, and I think anyone who's a small podcast or show or wants to do events, try and partner with places where you can, get free event space. And, we worked with WeWork when WeWork was happening, and they let us use a bunch of their event spaces free for where they would also have to have their WeWork employees or WeWork members also come. And then we tried to get food and drink that was donated by people that wanted to reach our audience as well. So we were crafty about things, but it was a lot of time and effort. And then you're on the go 24/7, but it was really, really beautiful experience. But just what I would say is that if someone's looking for an additional revenue stream, events is good, but I think that there are other opportunities that are digital that could be more lucrative and have like more, you could be making money much more easily than like doing events.
Gotcha. So what are those opportunities that you would say?
I think the number one thing is like figuring out what the thing that people ask you questions about all the time, like how to edit, how to like do, for us, it's like how to interview. For us, it's how do I launch a podcast? How do I grow my show? So what we did was basically took these questions that people were asking us all the time, like how do I launch a podcast? How do I market my podcast? How do I grow my podcast? And put it into an offering where we could just be like, oh, this is how you do it, and then have them pay for it. So I think digital offerings and digital courses and programs and things like that, it doesn't have to be the same for everyone, but I've found that to be really good because you can make recurring revenue all the time. And then all you need to do is focus on marketing it. And then you could do like a paid for newsletter. I've seen those are really cool. You can do paid for podcasts where you have like a specific feed. There's just a lot of things out there. You could do freelance work at home, etc. But I think that I've now been rethinking like, how can I get to the next level of what we're making in an aligned way without killing myself? Because we were just like working full-time jobs, traveling, doing a tour was like not the vibe. I was like unwell.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot. I can't believe that you were also doing that while working too. That's job. Crazy. I mean, just going to so many different places and whatnot. But it's really powerful what you said about using it as a marketing ploy, because it adds that touch point, that face-to-face interaction with you and your audience to let you know, like, I mean, of course, they know that you're real from listening to you and then watching you, following you on Instagram, but to actually like be in the same room as you and to like be able to talk to you. I'd rather have those like 200 hardcore fans that you were bringing to an event who now they've interacted with Krista, they've interacted with Lindsey. They're going to go out and like be like, champions for the Almost 30 brand moving forward. You know, they're not going to be, it's like it's an upfront cost in marketing, but now then over time, the ROI, which you can't really measure, is going to be incredible because you're going to have all of this word of mouth of people like spreading essentially, for lack of better terms, the gospel of Almost 30
exactly
from those
they
events.
Can join our cult. But it's like, I think too, have you heard of Kevin Kelly?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like the 1,000 True Fans.
That's it.
Yes.
That's it. And that's the one thing that I tell all the people that we work with in any capacity. I'm like, man, 1,000 True Fans is the vibe. Like, instead of being like, I want 1 million downloads, whatever, blah, blah, blah. It's like, how can you find people that really love what you're doing and then, support them even greater in a greater capacity by monetizing some other way? And I feel like for a long time, we were like, we want to have this many downloads, blah, blah, blah. And we pulled the number literally out of our butts. And now we're just much more focused on like the people that actually really love our show. Like, how can we serve them in a deeper way? How can we connect with them in a deeper way? And then your mission becomes more clear, because when you're just like, I want this many, it's like the sky's is the limit, which is a beautiful thing, but the sky's also the limit. So you don't know what to do to get there. But if you have your loyal audience, even if it's 50 people, 100 people, 10 people, you have these people that love you and fuck with what you do. So it's like, how can you just figure out what they want from you and how can you do more of that to support them? Yeah.
And even what you're talking about there and alluding to with the 1,000 True Fans philosophy, you don't necessarily need to, like the recurring revenue or lifetime value of somebody who is 1,000 True Fan, like doesn't have to be that high. Actually. Like, I mean, imagine if you had 1,000 True Fans for Almost 30, and maybe this is the case where like people are paying you on average like $100 a month, and you've got 1,000 of those people paying you $100 a month. That's $100,000 in recurring revenue each month for you too. And you guys you operate like more nimbly too versus like a traditional media company, right? Like you don't have like this bloat of we need like a gigantic ad sales team to like sell all this ad space on our part. Like I'm sure, you two probably handle some of that. Some of the people on your team who I've engaged with, they handle all of that. So like, that's what's so interesting to me about this space of where we are in media, in that like, it's almost like, we're taking like 20 steps back because like things got so bloated with the way newspapers and television stations and radio, the way that they had operated before in terms of like all the people that they had to employ. But because of technology, it's streamlining that, and it's creating like these opportunities like for yourself and others where you can really focus on what's most important. And that's creating good content and not have to worry so much about all the other things in between, because once you create a good product, people will come.
Yes, exactly. It's like creating good content and living your life. I think also too, it's like, hey, like it's okay to want to live your life. Like we create these things so that we can live our life too. And I've had to learn that myself, where it's like, oh my gosh, I can not work 24/7, or I don't have to always be doing, or I can actually, why am I working so hard for this life if I'm not living it? And I think I've really been trying to like live my life more, the past year.
Gotcha. Yeah. I think we all have had that opportunity with COVID, right? Is like just this forced pause, to steal a phrase from Matthew McConaughey. I listened to his audiobook, which was great. Green Lights. He talks about like the ideas of like forced winters. And I think that's what COVID was. And that it just still, kind of is at this point because the pandemic's still going on. But like just this idea of like, hey, you have to like reflect on where you're going and what you're doing. And so I think it sounds like you made the most of that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm perfect, but I just would say that I'm trying my best to understand the assignment. And I keep saying that, and my audience is like, why are you being so cryptic? But I just feel like understanding the assignment of like, what is this for us? Like, why is this happening for us right now? Like, what is it asking us to do? Is it asking us to rest? Is it asking us to, look at our priorities? Is it asking us to spend more time with our family? Like, there's a lot. And I think if we don't take the forced winter as a message, or, the assignment as a message, then we're kind of like missing the point.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, one other thing I do want to talk to you about in regards to like the business front of things is just the community element, right? Like you guys have this really diehard community of people that love what you do. And you've built like a membership community and you've offered them incentives, offered people incentives for signing up. I'm really curious about how you thought about that and designed like what it is that you were going to give people for signing up and just where you see that moving forward going into the future.
Yeah. So when we couldn't do tour, that was something where we're like, okay, how can we connect with our community or people that we love and that love us? And the membership was something we wanted to do for a long time. It just didn't feel like the right time. So it was like perfect. We're like, we can't meet with you in person, but we want to still have like a space where we can all connect. And I feel like so many of our people in our community are people that are just sort of waking up in a way to their life, and they feel like they're changing and evolving and growing, and they may not feel like they can relate to people around them. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. I felt like for most of my life that I was so different. I felt like I didn't fit in. I felt like, I was interested in things that other people weren't interested in and vice versa. And so I wanted to create a space where people could feel like they found people that were interested in what they were interested in, wanted to grow, wanted to change, wanted to like know themselves more deeply, wanted to like talk about the things that we talk about. So the membership is that. And we do workshops every month, which are great. So we'll have our guests come in for like a deep dive workshop. And then we'll do member hangs where we'll talk about like our monthly themes. And then we have extra episodes and bonus content and stuff. But I've been thinking about it all week, how I really want to invest even more of my time and energy into it, because that's like the thing of the loyal fans. It's like, how can we serve these people in a greater way and really make this a thing that's like even bigger than it is? But I've also had to do a lot of work around like, oh my gosh, what does it feel like for me to have the feeling like there's this many people counting on me to give them something or give them content or show up? And so that's something I've also had to work on, is like, there's a lot of pressure of feeling like you have to show up every single day for people, or feeling like you have to do X, Y, and Z, or feeling like you have to give them everything in the kitchen sink. And so it's like not as easy as people think. It's like you could set up a membership and it's all good, but you have to service those people the entire time too. So it's a lot more effort than I thought, but it's really rewarding. Yeah.
That is one thing that, you think about is just, you're selling them a product. Yeah. It's a different kind of product. It's not like a physical product that you can hold in your hands and something like that. But that key word that you said there is like service, right? Is thinking of like, how can I serve these people? Because it's an exchange of value, like they're paying you money to have access to this community, and, you want to deliver value back to them because that's what they expect. And so I imagine, again, that like what you're saying, it's very difficult to kind of toe that line and balance all of that. I will say though, it has been interesting when I've talked to other creators. There was one creator I spoke to. She was incredible. Bernadette Banner. She does this YouTube channel on Victorian fashion from like the 1800s. And she has like over 1 million subscribers, and her fan base is insane because they listen to, she shared it, and like they all came to the podcast, which was incredible. But even with her, I remember her saying, I asked her about her Patreon, because she has a Patreon set up, and she, actually had mentioned that she hasn't put that much attention on it, but like there are still people who are willing to pay her just because like they like her. Like I'm sure there's an element of that too, where people they just trust you and Lindsey so much that regardless of whatever it is that you're getting out of a membership, if they're paying for a membership, they get so much value out of like the free content that you're giving in like your podcasts and social media that it's like, dude, I'll just chip in like however much here to sign up for this just because I like them so much.
Yeah. It's like, I've had that too, where people will DM me. They're like, you've really made an impact on my life. I want to figure out a way to like pay you for it. And, it's like, I don't need that, but it did make me realize that I've had people like that too, where I've listened to their podcast or something and they said something that literally changed my life. And I'm like, dang, how do you repay that person? And so it is like receiving that, being able to receive that thanks or that money or whatever it is, to be like, oh my gosh, no, I actually helped awaken this person or help support this person. So I think that's yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the last things I want to talk to you about on the business front is just scaling your company, right? Like I've had the pleasure of interacting with some of your team, Tiffany and Maggie. They've been great, with emailing me and back and forth. I'm really curious about that element of business. When did you decide that it was like, hey, we need to hire some people here, and then how do you find talented people to help you achieve the goals that you need to achieve? And because at the same time, you have to consider like, all right, if I want to get talented people, like I'm going to have to, budget for this. And what does that look like? What are the costs for that? So I'm really curious about that.
Yeah. So we have, I think 9 people on our team right now. I'm not sure, which is bad, but the team thing started. So we had an intern, Chloe, who started with us after 6 months of the podcast. She was a college student and she supported us as an intern. And then she ended up being our first employee. And then she was with us for 5 years or something. Tiffany, who you interacted with, she gave me her resume. She was working at Sony. She was like a director at Sony, and we hadn't made $1 on the podcast, and was like, I want to work for you guys. I'm like, we are ridiculous. Like, this is nothing. But our people have been people that really see us and like really, really align with us from like a values level. So that's been really important. But Chloe really helped expand us and understand that like, oh my God, when we have help, we're able to do way more. And I think because we had full-time jobs, we were able to pay her and have her support us. Like a lot of the money to pay Chloe came out of our full-time job paycheck. A lot of money for anything for tour came out of our full-time jobs paychecks. We started making money after maybe a year, and we were making like $250 a month. It wasn't a lot. So I didn't know that I'd be someone that'd be managing people. I didn't know that I'd be someone that would be like the head of a company. And managing people and working with people has been so powerful because it's really been important to us scaling. I will say that, we have people that are amazing on our team that are really experienced. So we pay them top dollar. When you look at our business and how much money you make, you'd be like, oh my gosh, Krista and Lindsey are like rolling in money. And it's like, no, we're not. We actually make a normal salary, and we hope that over time we can scale our business and then really start to make profit. But right now we have like a very flat organization where everyone's making really good money because we get better work from them. They feel more supported. We're able to ask more of them. We get better quality talent. And then hopefully we can just continue to like build revenue while we're keeping everyone sort of flat for a little bit so Lindsey and I can take more money. But my advice is, it's so weird because I've always heard hire slow, fire fast. And I didn't realize the truth of that until recently. We found someone that was like for a recommendation of someone, and Lindsey and I kind of knew that it wasn't like a energy fit. Like there wasn't like the same rapport that we have with our other employees. And we didn't hire slow and we didn't fire fast. And we kind of had this like misalignment for quite a few months, which just creates lag in the business. So I would just say, as a boss and business owner or someone that's building a team, like give yourself permission to listen to your gut and listen to your intuition for when you need to hire, for who you need to hire for, and don't feel bad about not hiring someone or firing someone. Like it's in their best interest to move on more quickly or to move and go to the next thing. I think it's been taking me a long time because I feel bad. I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel bad. I want to support them. And if it's not a fit, it's not a fit. And I had to remember that about myself when I was working in my full-time job. I'm like, oh my gosh, I would just be there and be like, so disinterested and checked out. Like, that's part of the process for people. They're not going to love it as much as you do. They're not going to give as much time and energy as much as you do. And you really just have to accept that piece. But managing people isn't easy. I would say like, for people that are wanting to grow a business and be a millionaire and do all these things, it's really powerful. But just think about what comes with that too. Like, would you feel better just having you doing what you're doing for making $100,000 a year? Or do you want to manage 9 people and then make 150? Whatever it is, it's a lot more work and effort than people think, but it is like a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier in this conversation. There has to be like an enjoyment of that process, right? Like, and it seems like that is something that you are embracing in being a leader and being somebody who runs a company, that there's a level of enjoyment or satisfaction that you're getting that you can't measure in financial terms. But you are enjoying like getting to mentor young people who come into your company as an intern or maybe like a lower level staff or help them, in their career. So yeah, there are all these like intangible things I think that creators like yourself have to consider when it comes to building and scaling. And so it's really fascinating to hear that inside look at things.
And it's pulled us away from the creating a lot. So it's like, I mean, that always happens. You know, everyone says that. They're like, you build a business, or you like want to build a business, and because you're creative, and then the business comes and then you're not spending any time being creative. And so we've had to balance that too. Like, how can we make sure that our team is doing more for us so that we can be creating more? And I think people say that all the time, but just as the creator, you need to make sure that your number one priority is creating, not like doing admin stuff, not doing, you know, team reviews. Like, you should as much be creating as like the main priority, so you can continue to grow as like a person and then as like a business.
For sure. Well, Krista, thank you so much. This has been, a great conversation. Very fun to have both you and Lindsey on this 2-part episode that we have here on the Videocraft Show presented by Video Husky. As always, we'll have, links to all your work and where everybody can find you. Almost 30 podcasts, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Tune in. They're phenomenal. They are great. And again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Wow, this has been so much. Like, I loved your questions. I was just really grateful when we were talking. I'm like, oh, I'm glad that you're asking me things that I don't normally talk about. Just felt super fluid. And to know that you really love and get value from the show, like, nothing means more to me. So I'm so glad. I can't wait to share with our audience.
Thank you so much.
Amazing.
Thank you again to Krista Williams of Almost 30 for joining me on this edition of the Videocraft Show presented by Video Husky. Once again, if you'd like to find out where to follow Krista and listen to the Almost 30 podcast, you can find all the links to that and everything else that we talked about in this conversation in the show notes over at www.videocraftshow.com. Also want to remind you, if you are having trouble scripting and organizing your ideas, we have a tool for you. Get a copy of our free video script template. Using it can help you organize and structure your ideas, and also lessen the burden of editing in the process. All you have to do is go to www.videocraftshow.com, sign up to our email list, and that'll get delivered straight to your inbox right after you sign up. Want to ask you all too, if you haven't already, make sure to leave a review for the podcast if you are enjoying it. Go to Apple Podcasts.com, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. I don't even know if you can do reviews on. I have been doing this podcast since January, and I still don't know if you can do reviews on Spotify. Let me know if that's the case. Just tell me where you can review podcasts. Wherever it is that you can review podcasts, please leave a review for us there, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast too, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Finally, as always, got to thank my team for helping me to produce the show. As always, big shout out to Nikki Vicente, my producer, Ingrid Saraiba, my editor, and Paulo Lopez on graphics. And a reminder for all of you, if you want your videos to be edited and looked just like this, then visit videohusky.com to learn more. I will see you on another episode of the Videocraft Show presented by Video Husky. Until next time.